Since burning, all space is filled with the fragrance. All Buddhas smell it from afar. Auspicious clouds gather everywhere. With utmost sincerity, all Buddhas appear. We pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. We pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. We pay homage, we offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian. I've been part of this Sangha for a while, and I get an opportunity to talk today, and you get to listen. Today I'm going to talk about something I learned, a book I read or studied in when I was at Naropa back in over a decade ago. It's been a while ago. Couple things. It's by the book was by a second century monk, Nagarjuna. But I'll start off with a little bit about my own journey and then go into some of the selected readings from the book. And it has to do with emptiness and this whole concept of what is emptiness. We do not say that because things are empty, they do not exist. We say that because the things exist, they are empty. And that's a Tibetan saying. And from this book, when one is no longer fooled by false appearances, phenomena are neither rarefied nor denied. They are understood interdependently as ultimately empty and thus as only conventionally real. And between those two things is we find the middle way. And the middle way is really the second turning is focused a lot on what we would call the middle way. So a little bit about myself and how I got into this whole process of Buddhism. Grew up as an agnostic all the way through early adulthood. And things were going well. Life was just what it was. And I got married to a young lady at that time. I was 29-ish. Then things got real difficult for reasons I don't want to go into here. But yeah, it was a real difficult period and suffering arose. Suffering was a little bit of my past, here, there, a little bit of here, there. And then all of a sudden, suffering was all endemic. It was everywhere, every time, all the time. So it was a difficult period. But we had kids, and so one of us had to be sane. And as the sane parent, I started to look for ways to help bring sanity into our home and sort of lower this whole intense suffering that we were going through. And so about 30 years ago, after looking over here at Confucianism and Taoism and Native American wisdom, I got into this thing called Buddhism and Theravada and the Four Noble Truths. And that seemed to say, okay, here's a way to work with this freaking thing called suffering. And so that really sort of resonated deep down. And I got into this American version of Vipassana, Jack Kornfeld, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg. And I was reading all those things. I would get a strong grasp that I was causing my own suffering. And so maybe there's a way to get out of this thing. You know, if it's my cause, if I'm causing it, I can maybe stop causing it, and that would be kind of nice. So it's a strong sense that, yeah, this thing called self was why I was grasping, it was why I was causing my own suffering. And I went on a lot of retreats during that decade and into the early knots, as we would call them. Did a lot of reading, but had no sangha. I was raising kids, going to work. And so, but and I had another program that was helping me, and combining these two programs found a way for me to really lessen that intense suffering I was feeling. And about 25 years into that, I got a chance to retire early, retired around 55, 57 years old, and decided to deepen my study of Buddhism, because this is the thing that was helping me find ways to lessen the suffering of my life, Buddhism was. And went back to school and said, maybe I'll become a Buddhist chaplain. And so I looked around, I found this school called Naropa out in Boulder, Colorado. And I went out to Naropa and studied for 3 years. Now at Naropa, the first semester, you have a bunch of different classes, but your Buddhism class, the first semester, is the first turning. And okay, that's where I learned about the move toward lessening the hold of self would lead me to, lessen the trust of my will, and that suffering could be released. And within that, I said, okay, I'm starting to get this. I'm starting to get this. I don't have to suffer if I decide I can find a way to just lessen my grasping. If I don't grasp so much, I won't suffer so much. So lightly, don't hold, let go, let go. And then came the second semester, which is we did first turning, second semester, second turning. And then comes the Heart Sutra. And it was like, ding, ding, yes. There's something else here besides that could really help me out. And the Heart Sutra was it. And as we have been reading in our books, or heard in our books, there is no suffering in the Heart Sutra. They declare there's no suffering. Shariputra, form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Shariputra, emptiness is the characteristics of all dharma. And so if I could understand emptiness as the characteristics of all dharma, maybe I could find a way to lessen the suffering I was imposing on myself. Now, the first and fourth is what's called these fourfold profundity. The first one being that form does not differ from emptiness. And the third being form is emptiness. That really could work for me. Because I have an engineering background as an electrical engineer, and the implications was that logical to follow that causes and conditions leads one to the concept that there is no form as an independent, inherent existence. Everything results from causes and conditions. Nothing independently exists. And that was like the first one, right? Form does not differ from emptiness. So form doesn't independently exist, therefore maybe it's empty. And the third one, form is emptiness. Yeah, that tells me it is true. And so these things help me think about form as a compilation of causes and conditions. And each particular cause and conditions themselves are nothing more than a compilation of other causes and conditions, and on and on and on. And therefore, form is emptiness. But there's a second part of this profundity, which is emptiness is form. Now that one blew my mind. How could that be true? How could emptiness be form? And it's much harder for me to grasp. And to study the school of the middle way, the Yamaka, the study of the middle way, gave me a glimpse of why these lines provide an introduction to the true nature of reality, that emptiness is form. The light first started when I read something from this book, The Sun of Wisdom. Phenomena do appear, but they have no inherent existence. by themselves. Phenomena are not what we conventionally call empty, but they are emptiness. And I'm going to read a paragraph from this. It means that things do not truly exist, but rather they exist in dependence upon coming together of causes and conditions. Things only exist because of causes and conditions which brings them into existence. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. It means dependent origination. Emptiness and dependent arising have the same meaning. Therefore, when emptiness is possible, everything is possible. If things truly exist, in other words, they have an inherent existence, they would never change. The world would be stagnant. If there was not dependent origination, we would all be here forever, and we would not leave this space. But things change. In Old Path White Cloud, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, emptiness is form's mode of being. And that got me to really grasp better that second profundity, which is emptiness is form. Emptiness is form's way of being. Oh, I said that wrong, excuse me. Yeah, emptiness is form's way of being. And in fact, the opposite is also true. Form is emptiness modes of being. Emptiness manifests itself to me as form. And the word he uses in this book, he calls appearance emptiness. That it's a nice phrase that sort of talks about what form is. Form is appearance emptiness. And that gave me an intellectual understanding of emptiness. And I want to share now some readings from Nagarjuna's book, The Middle Way, that helped me after, and I won't do the whole book because I've only read one or two chapters. There's 24 chapters, no, 26 chapters in this book. First, a little bit about Nagarjuna. So he was a 2nd century Buddhist monk. They say he lived in the south of India. Not much is known about him. So he was around 400 to 500 years after the Buddha's nirvana, when Buddha died, and 400 or 500 years later, they're still working on trying to understand his teachings as we are today. And at that time, though, they were thinking about this thing called the Middle Way. He was a Mahayana Buddhist, which is the second turning Buddhism. In several of his works, he defended Mahayana sutras as the really authentic word of the Buddha. And in his first sermon, the Buddha, when he talked about setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma, that's where he sat with those five people who used to be his peers when he was an ascetic. When he sat with them, he talked about setting of the wheel of Dharma in motion. The Buddha spoke of the middle way between extremes of self-indulgence and mortification. Just real quick, it's only 1 or 2 paragraphs I'll read from that sutta. So again, this is when he finally came out from sitting under the Bodhi tree, and he's been enlightened. And he wanders around, and somebody, I can't remember what it was, but convinced him he should probably teach what he's learned. So if I'm going to teach this, I'm going to go back to those 5 ascetics I used to live with, and I'll teach to them for the first time. And here's what he said. Bhikkhuis, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What 2? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble and unbeneficial. And secondly, the pursuit of self-mortification, which is what they lived. Remember, they denied themselves everything, thinking that that's the only way to get rid of self, is to deny the self of anything it wants, deny it. And so he's telling them, you're doing that wrong. You should not pursue this self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering toward either of these 2 extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, and to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nirvana. And so that's how, in the first turning, the Buddha described the middle way. Sensual pleasure, which is where he was when he was a prince. Remember, they would debauchery and drugs and everything was well, the way to live. And then self-mortification. He said, if I deny myself everything, maybe I'll find truth that way. And he found out neither of those works, but then he discovered under the Bodhi tree the middle way. So that was setting the wheel, the motion of the wheel of Dharma, in motion of the wheel of Dharma. Nagarjuna says there's another middle way. He expanded the notion of the middle way into a philosophical sphere, identifying a middle way between solidified existence, something that is solid and doesn't change, and non-existence, nihilism, or between permanence and nihilism. For Nagarjuna, the ignorance that is the source of all suffering is the belief in an intrinsic existence. It is a belief that things exist autonomously, independently, and permanently. To hold this belief is to succumb to the extremes of permanence. It's equally mistaken, however, to believe that nothing exists. This is the extreme of nihilism. Emptiness, which in Nagarjuna is the true nature of reality, is not the absence of existence, but the absence of intrinsic existence. The absence that this thing is here and will never change. So I'm just going to read some short passages. They're all little verses, and if you don't have a paper, I've passed them out. Only because that way, if you want to, you can follow when I come up to one of these. You say, oh yeah, okay, now I hear what he's saying again. Again, I've only selected parts of them because the book itself has 20-some chapters again, 27 chapters. And so I'm going to read, you'll see one, the first chapter, Examination of Conditions. And I'm just going to read the first verse from Examination of Conditions. Now, all these verses are almost like, Shakespeare sonnets. There are 4 different lines in each of the verses. Neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause does anything whatever anywhere arise. Again, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause does anything whatever anywhere arise. So this verse proves that things do not arise from any of the 4 extremes. The one extreme is that they do not arise from themselves. They do not spontaneously arise. They do not just appear. They did not arise from something other than the selves. And the key there is just one other thing than themselves. That's the whole thing when they get into the talk with, how does a tree come from a seed? But they arise from many different causes and conditions. They do not arise from both themselves or something other than themselves, and they do not arise without any cause at all. These are the only 4 possible ways in which things could arise, and since none of them are valid, things do not simply appear. Here we use the word arise as like appear. Not result. It's not a result of something. They just arise. They appear. They do not have an inherent existence. Now, one way to understand this is to see that it is not the case that just one single cause or one single condition can bring something into existence, but rather that many causes and conditions must come together for any one particular result to occur, or for something to, they don't spontaneously arise, they arise from a whole series of causes and conditions which combine to make something happen. One way to understand this is to see that it is not the case that just one single cause or one single condition can bring something into existence, but rather many causes. So now I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 24. So chapter 20, I've only read 3 of these chapters, okay? Number 1, 24, and 25. But 24 is about the nature of emptiness itself and about the relation between emptiness and conventional reality. So there's these 2 truths we talk about. Emptiness, which is the ultimate truth, and conventional truth, which is what I live in. What we refer to as the 2 truths. As we see in a large part, it is posed, this whole chapter is posed as an argument against the proponents of nihilism. Because it was very easy for me to say, okay, emptiness. There's nothing there. This is okay. I don't have to worry. It's all nihilistic. That makes things so much simpler. It's so much less complicated to think nothing exists. And with my sort of, partial understanding in those early days, I was like, I got to share a funny story. Okay, Nancy's laughing because she knows what's coming. So she's joined me in Boulder, and we're sitting for dinner. And I came out of one of my classes about emptiness. I said, Nancy, you're no different than that bench. Let me tell you why. She was not happy. Bless her heart, as they say in the South. She still came home and didn't run away. But it was so easy to slip to nihilism. That's so simple. Everything's the same. There's nothing. Luckily, I got over that.
And Nancy's still around.
And Nancy is still around. So this chapter 24 is about the nature of emptiness itself and about the relation between emptiness and conventional reality. The first stanza, I'll call them stanzas in here, was, if all of this is empty, neither arising nor ceasing, then for you it follows, and now he's talking to the people who believe in nihilism. For you, it follows that the Four Noble Truths do not exist. So these are Buddhists who believe in the Four Noble Truths, but he says, if all of this is empty, neither arising nor ceasing, then for you, it follows that the Four Noble Truths do not exist. I and everything else exists in dependence upon coming together of causes and conditions. Emptiness does not mean complete nothingness, it means dependent origination. Emptiness and dependent origination have the same meaning in this context. Now I'll skip ahead. There's a bunch of other stuff between number 1 and number 7, but number 7 was the one that called to me next. We say that this understanding of yours, again, the nihilist, of emptiness and the process of emptiness, and of the significance of emptiness is incorrect. As a consequence, you are harmed by it. Since most of us do not understand the true nature of reality, and the nihilists did not understand the true nature of reality, and the liberation and ease of existence that comes from the true understanding of the true nature of reality, we suffer needlessly. And that's what this refers to, is that since the nihilists do not understand the true nature of emptiness, as a consequence, they're harmed by that. They suffer because they don't understand it. If they can embrace the whole concept of the true nature of, both conventional reality and ultimate reality, then they'll be relieved of suffering. Number 8 goes, the Buddhist teaching of the Dharma is based on two truths: a truth of worldly convention and an ultimate truth. Number 9, those who do not understand the distinction drawn between these two truths do not understand the Buddha's profound truth. And without a foundation in conventional truth, the significance of ultimate truth cannot be taught. Without understanding the significance of ultimate truth, liberation is not achieved. So let me read those through one more time. The Buddhist teaching of the Dharma is based on two truths. Again, a truth of worldly convention, conventional truth, and an ultimate truth, which is emptiness. Those who do not understand the distinction between these two truths do not understand the Buddhist profound path. So those who ignore conventional truth and only believe emptiness do not understand the Buddhist profound truth. Without a foundation in conventional truth, the significance of the ultimate truth cannot be taught. Without understanding the significance of the ultimate, liberation is not achieved. Now, while these two truths are introduced here as quite distinct, later on we'll talk about the fact that they are, in many ways, both distinct and one. They are two sides of the same coin. There was a neat little, I get lost into Facebook sometimes, and there's this, I think some of you may have seen it, there's a a picture of this little sculpture. When you look at this side, it looks like a square. And when you start to go around the sculpture, then it takes a different form, a different form, and a different form. And when it comes to the other side, it's a circle. So this is one thing that is both a square and a circle. And that's one way to think about the two truths. Conventional truth and ultimate truth are two sides of the same coin. You just see them from a different perspective. They are, in fact, not different in and of themselves. It's just the perspective you look at them from is what you see is going to be different. It is important to see here that Nagarjuna is not disparaging the conventional by contrast to the ultimate, but is arguing that understanding the ultimate nature of things is completely dependent upon understanding conventional truth. Again, understanding the ultimate nature of things is dependent upon understanding conventional truth. First, understanding the ultimate nature of things is understanding that their conventional nature is merely what is generally perceived as real. But secondly, in order to explain emptiness, one must use words and concepts and explain things such as interdependence, impermanence, and so forth, all of which are conventional phenomena. So the conventional phenomena are required to really understand and explain the ultimate truth, is what he's saying here. Number 11. By a misperception of emptiness, a person of little intelligence is destroyed, like a snake incorrectly seized or like a spell incorrectly cast. Again, who's this person? These are the nihilists. The Manyamika doctrine of emptiness is subtle and can be easily misinterpreted. In particular, it's often misinterpreted as thoroughgoing nihilism about phenomena. And if you're stuck into believing in nihilism, it's going to bite you. It's going to lead you to a bad place. Number 12, for that reason, the Dharma is deep and difficult to understand and to learn. Anybody not believe that the Dharma is difficult to understand and learn? It is difficult to understand and learn. The Buddha's mind despaired of being able to teach it. And in the first turning, he teaches there is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, and there's a way to get rid of suffering. It allows us to find a nice, methodical way to work myself out of the suffering I impose upon myself. The second turning says, that's a great start. But let me let you release it all. So, Venerable has often, or at least several times, shared that in the first turning, there is something talked about in emptiness. It's in the Simsaspa Sutta. This is where the Buddha has a few of his people with him. And he says, and they're in a forest, he says, and he holds out a hand with leaves. Remember this story? He holds out, he says, the leaves in this hand represent the essential teachings he's imparted in the Four Noble Truths. These leaves will allow you to relieve yourself of suffering. Focus on these leaves and you will relieve yourself of suffering. It's concise, it's directly applicable to end suffering. Here's a way to do it. Let me write it down. Follow these steps, the Eightfold Path. You follow these Eightfold Path steps and you will relieve suffering. He says, now the rest of this forest, there's lots of leaves out there. Don't get lost in them. But in the second turning, we learned there are a few of those leaves we could work with that could make us even relieve suffering more easily in a less willful way, a way that we just release suffering as opposed to willfully get rid of suffering. Though in that forest, with those leaves symbolize all the other knowledge and insights that the Buddha had gained during his awakening, but he despaired that we could not grasp them. It was just too far beyond where the world was at that time, which is what the second turning is supposed to be, is that now the world is maybe a little more settled, we can move to the second turning. And That's what emptiness is, a fundamental aspect of the second turning, which is taught about in what? The Heart Sutra, right? For him to, and then number 14, for him to whom emptiness is clear, everything becomes clear. For him to whom emptiness is not clear, nothing becomes clear. Again, for him to whom emptiness is clear, everything becomes clear. For him to whom emptiness is not clear, nothing becomes clear. So for him to whom emptiness is clear means if emptiness is true, is the true nature of things, then for those people, things do not have a true inherent existence. Remember, solidifying something, making it real and inherently existent is where I grasp. And where I grasp is where I suffer. And so for those people who do not have this sense of things have an inherent existence that is non-changeable, that I cannot grasp onto, then there's nothing to grasp, and then there's nothing to suffer. Because if I can't grasp, I can't suffer. Because suffering comes from my grasping. According to Nagarjuna, the doctrine that everything is empty does not mean that everything is unreal or non-existent. It only means that everything is empty in the sense that everything else arises and perishes through the process of dependent origination. Everything comes and up and goes away, arises and ceases from dependent origination. They do not automatically appear and never change. Emptiness does not mean complete nothingness. It means dependent origination. Emptiness is dependent upon arising, has the same, emptiness and dependent arising have the same meaning. If things were not empty, however, if they were dependently arisen, then nothing new would be possible. If they were not dependently arisen, then nothing new would be possible. If things truly existed, they would never change. They would have their own nature, and that did not depend upon causes and conditions, and therefore causes and results would not exist. Nothing would ever arise or cease. And we know that's not the world. We know things arise and cease. The skeptic need not be thought of as denying the phenomena of codependently origination. Rather, the skeptic, which is in this case the nihilist, is failing to see that dependent origination is emptiness, in fact. The entire remainder of the chapter that he works in here is devoted to not arguing for emptiness, nor to argue for the reality of codependent origination, but rather to argue for their independent identities. Non-existent from nihilism means one thing, but here it only means that everything is empty in the sense that everything arises and perishes through the process of dependent origination. And that's all emptiness really means, is that everything has a cause and condition that makes it show up and makes it go away. And beneath all that, there's no one thing you can grab onto. They're all empty of any inherent existence. And again, emptiness only means inherent, non-changing existence. Is Joe?
Right, was dependent origination part of the first turning?
No.
Second.
If you perceive the existence of all things, well, yes, but its implications of, Joe, it was part of the first turning, but the implications of it, I didn't ever realize until the second turning. And that's what comes in here, that dependent origination, which is first turning stuff, when you dive deep enough into it, when you get below that handful of leaves that the Buddha talks about in the one sutta, is when you start to recognize, there's more behind dependent origination than the way I first learned it to be. So it is in the first turning. A good clarification. I think it's an important clarification, because the point of that is rebirth is linked into dependent origination, because at the end, dependent origination is death, and then, by the way, it starts over again. So dependent origination is critical to the understanding of rebirth. The second layer below that is what the second turning is about. If you perceive the existence of all things in terms of their essence, this is number 16. If you perceive the existence of all things in terms of their essence, then the perception of all things will be without the perception of causes and conditions. If you perceive the existence of all things as not changing, as this is what it is, this is a phone, and this is what a phone is, period. If I perceive it that, then the perception of all things will be without the perception of causes and conditions. I know this phone didn't just appear. If you take this phone apart, there's lots of little pieces and stuff in here. These are two related assertions contained in this. There are two related assertions contained in this critical verse. Excuse me. The perception. First, at the conventional level, the way we live, the nihilist, by virtue of thinking that things exist, is to exist inherently, will be unable to account for dependent arising. Secondly, and more subtly, the opponent, in seeing actual existence as a discrete entity with an inherent essence, it would follow that for them, the reality of emptiness would entail that emptiness itself is an entity. An inherently existing entity at that. To see emptiness in this way is to see it as radically different from conventional reality. It is to see the conventional as illusory, not real, not a truth, but illusory, and emptiness as the only real reality standing behind it. It denies the truth of conventional reality. So if you perceive the existence of all things in terms of their essence as non-changing, then this perception of all things will be without the perception of causes and conditions. You will see that the only thing that's out there is emptiness. And that would mean that the conventional reality I live in would not be there. It denies the truth of it. That's what that stanza does. But Nagarjuna begins by distancing himself from the concrete view of emptiness. You don't want to concretize? What? Concretize emptiness. You don't want to make it a thing that doesn't change. Because if that's it, then all of a sudden nihilism is it. And nihilism is all there is. If you concretize emptiness, all there is nihilism. And that for a while, in my, that was, hey, that makes sense. Then all of a sudden, oh, wait, no. I don't like that. This brings us to the central verse of this chapter. In number 17, effects and causes, and agent and action, and conditions and arising and ceasing, and effects will be rendered impossible. If that preceding thing was true, that without if things are perceived if you perceive the existence of all things, then effects and causes, and agents in action, and conditions and arising and ceasing, and effects will be rendered impossible. If that previous stanza was true, then an inherently existing phenomenal world will be devoid of change, devoid of dependency, and so forth. By inherently existent emptiness, but inherently existent emptiness would render the phenomenal world completely non-existent. This defines the straits between which the middle path must be found. 1, the extreme of solidification of phenomenal world depends upon ignoring emptiness. While the extreme of solidification of emptiness requires us to be nihilistic about the phenomenal world. So on the one hand, if we think the phenomenal world is what it is and never changes, and on the other hand, then you ignore emptiness. On the other hand, if the extreme solidification of emptiness is being solid, we'd be nihilistic about the phenomenal world. And in between those two things is the middle way.
Right. Speaking, I was when you're speaking about nihilism, I think, I don't mean for myself, but for some people, I think sometimes nihilism it boils down to being
Thank you.
fatalistic. which for some people I think is an easy out to the nothing really matters like the song, nothing. And I think that's where I think some people get lost in that nihilistic point of view is.
Yeah, I'm trying to relate to that French philosophy about Sartre.
Existentialism.
Existentialism and nihilism are not exactly the same thing. So I think if you can take nihilism to existentialism, but that's not where the Buddha is who the Buddha is talking to here. These are nihilists who believe in certain things, but they've not been able to connect all the truths together for themselves. Does that help? So again, effects and causes and agent and action and conditions and arising and ceasing and effects would be rendered impossible if you thought things were concretized. This is inherently. So again, if you believe the phenomenal world is concretized, is solid,
Good move.
you have to ignore emptiness. Well, if you believe the solidification of emptiness, that requires it to be nihilistic, that the phenomenal world does not exist. A middle path must be found. Both extremes presuppose that to exist is to exist inherently, and it is to exist forever. The only disagree about whether the inherent existence is properly ascribed to the conventional world, conventional phenomena, or whether inherent existence is applied to ultimate nature, emptiness. Nagarjuna will deny exactly this presupposition, arguing that to exist is to exist conventionally, and that both conventional phenomena and the ultimate nature exist in exactly that way. And so the next verse, which is going to be 18 and 19, are the climax of the entire text. And we're going to stop there. Don't get your hopes up. And can truly be said to contain the entire system in embryo. They are perhaps the most often quoted, extensively commented on verses in all of Madhyamaka philosophy. Number 18. Whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. Number 19. Something that is not dependently arisen, such a thing does not exist. Therefore, a non-empty thing does not exist. So those two one more time. Number 18. Whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. And number 19. Something that is not dependently arisen, such a thing does not exist. Therefore, a non-empty thing does not exist. Everything that exists was dependently arisen and therefore is empty, but it does exist. That's the middle way. There's nothing that is not dependently arisen and cannot exist, and therefore it's not empty. It's not an empty thing, and it does not exist. The insight of the middle way's teaching is that whatever is dependently arisen is empty of its own essence. It's a combination of other things and causes and conditions coming together. The reason for this is that whatever thing it may be, its existence is not inherent, but rather merely imputed in dependence upon some other basis. This understanding is the path of the middle way, free from the extremes of existence and non-existence, permanence and extinction, realism and nihilism. One more time, this understanding is the path of the middle way, free from the extremes of existence and non-existence, free from permanence and extinction, and free from realism and nihilism. Nagarjuna is asserting that any dependently arisen phenomena is emptiness. Not that they're empty, but it's emptiness. Emptiness and the phenomenal world are not two distinct things. They are rather two sides of the same coin. To say of something that it is dependently co-arisen is to say that it is empty. To say of something that it is empty is another way of saying that it is dependently arisen. Emptiness does not mean complete nothingness. It means dependent origination. So nothing lacks the three properties of emptiness, dependent origination, and conventional identity. Everything has a conventional identity, is dependently origin, and it has some sense of emptiness to it. Number 22 and number 23. My favorite topic, suffering.
In both suffering.
If something comes from its own essence, how could it ever be arisen? It follows that if one denies emptiness, there could be no arising of suffering. If suffering has an essence, its sensation would not exist. So if an essence is posited, one denies sensation. Since emptiness is dependent upon origination, when the opponent, i.e. the nihilist, denies this, he denies that suffering is dependently originated, but he agrees that all phenomena are dependently originated. He is thus forced to deny the inherent existence of suffering. So that's kind of complex. I'm going to read that one more time. Since emptiness is dependent origination, when the opponent denies this, he denies that suffering is dependently originated. But he agrees that all phenomena are dependently originated. He thus is forced to deny the inherent or existence of suffering. Suffering is not there by itself. It causes the condition. Suffering is just not inherently existent. The second noble truth is that suffering has a cause. But again, if the opponent asserts nothingness, the nothingness of suffering, he asserts that it does not arise from causes and conditions, yet Nagarjuna analysis shows that it must arise from causes and conditions in virtue of its emptiness. Secondly, the third noble truth is that the truth of cessation of suffering, but inherently existent things cannot cease. And the third noble truth says suffering can be, you can get rid of suffering. It can cease. We're getting close to the end. Number 36. Again, he has a lot of stuff in between these that they weren't really concise enough to get to what I think wanted to do in this talk. If dependent arising is denied, emptiness itself is rejected. This would contradict all the worldly conventions. Now, common sense holds the world to be a network of dependently arisen phenomena. So common sense only makes sense if the world is asserted to be empty of any inherent existence. Everything comes together from causes and conditions. Nothing exists by itself independently. Now, I'm not going to go into the Dharmakaya and all that other important aspects of Buddhism, but of the world we live in, that I exist in, there's nothing that exists inherently. It only comes from causes and conditions. The standpoint of emptiness is hence not at odds with the conventional standpoint, only with a particular philosophical understanding of it. That which takes the conventional to be more than merely conventional. What is curious, and from the Buddhist standpoint, sad, about the human condition, on this view, is the naturalness and seductiveness of imputing inherent existence to the things around us. You know, when I was a younger child, I imputed inherent existence to like certain things and toys I had. You know, I imputed my own inherent existence. Still, I'm not at a place where I don't believe I'm here. I believe I'm here. Conventionally, I am here. I don't inherent, and I believe I am inherently here, and that's the problem. Even though when I was, 1 year old, I was really only about this big, and now I'm 6'3". I still think Brian has his inherent existence. It's just the way I am in this world, and that's the problem that I live in. Solidification is the root. Grasping and craving is the root of solidification. Making things real is the root of grasping and craving, and hence of all suffering. And it is perfectly natural despite its incoherence. It's natural for me to solidify things, even though I know it's not true. I still do it every day, every minute, almost probably every second. There's very few seconds in my life where I don't solidify things. But by understanding emptiness, Nagarjuna urges us to break the habit and dig out the root of suffering. But if in doing so, one falls into the abyss of nihilism, which was an easy way to fall, intellectually sloppy, intellectually lazy, but an easy place to go, nothing is achieved. And it's between those two is the middle way. For then action is impossible if you believe in nihilism, and one's realizations amounts to nothing. Number 37. If emptiness itself is rejected, no action is appropriate. There would be action which did not begin, and there would be agent without action. If there is essence, the whole world would be unarising, unceasing, and static. The entire phenomenal world would be immutable. If it, the world, were not empty, then action would be without profit. The act of ending suffering and abandoning misery and defilement would not exist. And so number 39 is that big one, right? If it, the world, were not empty, then action would be without profit. The act of ending suffering and abandoning misery and defilement would not exist. And then, again, those French people.
The Institutionalists.
That's right.
What?
Jean-Paul
Sartre?
Yeah. Sartre. That's where they fall. There's no sense in doing anything because the world is senseless. That's what that last part was, right? If I am driven to solidify myself, the objects in the world around me, because of an instinctual feeling that without an intrinsically real self, an intrinsically real world, and intrinsically real values, my life would have no real meaning. Again, if I am driven to solidify myself, make myself solid, the objects in the world around me would be instinctually feeling because of an instinctual feeling that without intrinsically real self, an intrinsically real world, and intrinsically real values, my life would have no real meaning. Nagarjuna emphasizes at the close of this chapter that this gets things exactly backwards. That's exactly the wrong way to look at it. That forcing myself to think of these things as real and what is important, except that's what causes me the suffering. If we seriously and carefully examine what such a solidified world would be like, it would indeed be hopeless. But instead, we treat ourselves, others, and our values as empty. If we treat ourselves and others and our values as empty, there is hope and a purpose to life. For then, in the context of impermanence and dependence, human action and knowledge make sense and moral and spiritual progress become possible. It is only in the context of ultimate non-existence that actual existence makes any sense at all. So the conventional reality makes sense because of the other truth of ultimate reality, emptiness. Whoever sees dependent arising also sees suffering and its arising and its sensation as well as the path. So he closes as he opens with the Four Noble Truths, this time connecting them not negatively as in the beginning to emptiness, but positively to dependent arising. Understanding the nature of dependent arising is itself understanding emptiness, and is itself the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. On the one hand, they are conventionally existence, and they are things we ordinarily say about them are in fact true. The Four Noble Truths are in fact true, to the extent that we get it right on the terms of the everyday. Snow is indeed white, and there are indeed tables and chairs in this room. On the other hand, they are ultimately non-existent. They have no inherent independent existence, is a better way to say it. They have no inherent independent existence. These two truths seem as difficult as night and day, being and nothing. But the import of this chapter and the doctrine is that their ultimate non-existence and their conventional existence are exactly the same thing. Hence, the deep identity of the two truths, and this is because emptiness is not other than dependent arising, and hence, because emptiness is empty. And that's how Nagarjuna pulls together and tries to show how the nihilist has it wrong. That between those two truths, emptiness and conventional reality they are the same thing, and that makes everything knit together. And so that's what I wanted to share. This is the detailed book I got, written by J. Garfield, I believe. Yeah, J. Garfield. And this was another book I had on it that was a little less detailed, gave us a more, I would guess, everyday discussion of it. Not at the same level of detail as the other one. So that's what I wanted to share. Emptiness is what helped me break through this forceful process of not suffering. I was willfully trying not to suffer with the first turning. And with the second turning, I could release more easily into eliminating suffering. It's a more gentle release for me from the first turning, which was, I will not suffer. And so we can open up for comments and questions.
Sort of a two-part question here.
Wait,
Two-part question. As coming back to that comment that you just stated and made earlier, in the second turning, we learn to release suffering, whereas in the first, there is a willful, and I'm not sure the word you use, but like struggle with it, a willful effort to do it. Could you expand on that in terms of your own experience?
It's my own experience. There are a lot of Theravadins who I don't think would say that it's a willful way. They found a way to do it without being willful. And if I had spent more time, I may have released into that myself. But for me, it was, I will not grasp. I will not grasp. I will not grasp. And that's how I would release suffering, was not willfully not grasping. With more time, I may have gotten to the point where I just did not grasp. And I think Panyadipa was a phenomenal example of a person who didn't grasp. For me, it was harder. And the concept of emptiness gave me a different way to not grasp. So I guess that's the best way I could describe it, if that's helped at all.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. The second one you described in yourself, and I'm asking you to talk more about yourself here, that you still relate to yourself as a concrete entity and concrete reality. You still are, if you're completely honest with yourself, you are being, that's how you feel about your life. But through this phenomenon, did I just turn this off?
No.
That through this understanding of emptiness, that there's a way to be that's liberating from that stuckness and habitual tendencies. What is it about the discussion of emptiness and an intuition about what emptiness is? How does that, I'm interested in how that guides you, how that guides us. What is it that's speaking to you about the truth of that? Is it an intellectual truth? Is it an intuition? Is a heart truth that causes you to realize that this concreteness that you attribute to yourself is not the rule to be guided by?
I can probably best share that with examples, I guess. I often laugh at the absurdity of the things I do. And so, and what I in another program I was with, I was sponsoring this young man. And he was he was taking things in life so seriously and everything so seriously. But and I started to find humor in how I was relating to that. And I would share and I'd say, oh yeah, and think about it, and I did it, and I would laugh a little, and he could not work with me that way. And so Nancy will attest to, there's times where I'll start laughing about something and she doesn't find it very funny. But that's because I don't make it so concrete that I'm able, I release things more easily than I used to, because I don't attach my identity to it as much as I would in the past, if that helps in any way, shape, or form.
Humor
Yeah.
is a great healing salve, isn't it?
It is, and seeing more the true nature of reality as this combination of both conventional and ultimate reality, seeing that both of them are there at the same time, allows humor to be more spontaneous for me than maybe it used to be in the past.
Thank you.
I love how you repeatedly said, the suffering I imposed upon myself.
Mm.
That in of itself, I think, is pretty liberating. And getting closer, getting closer to this being a profound teaching, and getting closer to the emptiness and experiencing that. And ultimately, whatever pops up is empty, but is also real.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful for this exploration, and so motivated to learn more about it. Because once you get this, it's like there's no need to do anything else. Because it's all empty.
And
Yeah.
true at the
Yeah.
same time.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
I was so afraid to say anything because I just knew I couldn't articulate it. But Elsie just did. That is how I feel. I feel that your discussion today has really brought me closer to this understanding of emptiness as form, form as emptiness, that has just eluded me completely for so long. And I'm not saying I got it, but I do feel closer to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that you kept repeating about conventional reality and ultimate reality, and how they're both, kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
That is very helpful too. Because, yeah, we do kind of think we're real. It does hurt if you burn your hand. So that is a truth. And then there's the other truth, that it's just causes and conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rima.
So Brian, I want to thank you, because this really brought a great solidification, or a real world down to earth explanation of something that, and I was with Sarah and I was with Elsie earlier this week, where I had this opportunity. First of all, I use the word opportunity versus hoop storm. of fear. Literally, I get out of school with the kids and within 48 hours, I'm having a driveway. If anyone has ever seen my driveway is a meltdown on a good day, but I'm having this situation where I may need to replace the entire driveway. $14,000. And my roof is older. Hadn't had the roof looked at, but there's been a lot of hail damage. Probably have the roof looked at. $12,000. So we're talking $26,000 potential. And of course, my initial thought process is, and I'm going to say it straight out, oh shit. And then I had to stop for a minute and look at the situation for what it was and the cause. And immediately I went, okay, that's what the feeling is. Oh shit, I have fear and panic. What a habitual tendency. Then to take a step away. What are the causes and conditions that could have created this? Okay, well, with the roof, done in 06. And I just stepped away and went, okay, this is where it is. This is where it is. And let go of the fear, got down to right now, this is the situation as it is, as it comes. Accept it. The driveway, looked at all the causes and conditions that could have caused that potential, and then went straight to logic and had multiple people come and look at it. At the end of the day, that oh shit reaction turned into $150 to fix my roof and a do-it-yourself project on the driveway, which is going to be fun for Dave, but but at the same time, the acceptance of everything that transpired to get me to this space with these two situations started long before I got into this situation, and the acceptance of you can cover this expense, it's going to hurt. And the gratitude of not just knowing that, but understanding that for me, that turning was, well, there could be a lot more of panic that Nina normally would have done, but the acceptance of those little places of grasping to, this is just the way it is and this is awful, versus a lot of things transpire between now and then. Just look at things for where they are. This is where it is. And it's a very simplistic view of what you're saying, but it was interesting that you brought this up, because for me, that was look at all the way back to all the causes and situations that transpired now and how grateful I was and how much like I do appreciate the deep dive into this today. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second that. This has been very clarifying.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
The Heart Sutra was the pivotal change in my approach to Buddhism. And to know that form is not different than emptiness and emptiness is not different than form was what drove me to look into this and try to understand it more clearly. Well, I will close.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
May the merit of this practice benefit all beings equally. May all beings increase their fortune and wisdom. And may they always have peace and auspiciousness. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you,
Thank you, Sandra.